Hi, I'm Jessica with Ellie Mac, and today I'm going to show you how to make this adorable gingerbread pillow. Now, this is a pattern, and so you can find the pattern for this in the description below. There is this version. Isn't he so cute? This little bow tie. And then there's also one with a dress that has a nice little swirl of frosting on the bottom. There are a couple different ways we can decorate this pillow. It's a pretty simple project and it's really fun to make. So come along with me and let's get started. So in this tutorial today, I'm going to walk you through the steps of using heat transfer vinyl, which is what I used for the icing and the buttons and the face. But there are also a couple other options. You can cut out fabric with the PDF file or the projector file, or even the cut file if you have a rotary blade on your cutting machine, like your Cricut or Brother Scan and Cut or whatever you've got. And then you can applique them on, or you can zigzag them on. Another option, well, two more options for the icing. One is that you can use a really woolly yarn, and you can either zigzag it on or use your free motion quilt foot if you have that on your sewing machine and drop the feed dock. The last option, which one of our testers did, which I thought was so cute, was to use rickrack. So if you have some white, really thick rickrack, you can just zigzag that on. Any of these can also be hand sewed if you prefer to do that, but most of it can be, or all of it really, can be machine sewn on. So now on this version, you have the bow tie here, but on the other version with the dress, you can also put the bow tie here or here. It's cute on the side, one of the sides, whichever one you choose. You can be so creative and decorate your cookie. I think kids will have a lot of fun with this too. So let me go ahead and show you all the different ways. I won't be showing you the yarn or the rickrack, but I think that's pretty self-explanatory. In the tutorial for this pattern, we do have a link to a video that shows a little bit of how to use the yarn and how you do that with your free motion quilting foot. I'll be showing you how to do the heat transfer vinyl, and obviously how to sew it up and stuff it. And then also the way where you can applique them on, which is also super simple. So let's get started. While I'm cutting this out, let's quickly go over what fabrics are good for this. I'm using flannel. You can also use fleece, like regular fleece, cuddle fleece, minky fleece. You can use cotton, any light to medium weight woven fabric, or very low stretch knit fabrics. Technically, fleeces are knits. Now here, I'm flipping the fabric over to the front side so that I can trace all the markings. This is very easy with the projector, but if you are using the print file, no problems. You can just go ahead and copy those all through too, and you can even cut out the paper where those things are so that you can get them nicely marked. Be sure to transfer all the markings over so that you have everything ready to go. Now what you'll need for this project is the front marked, the back of the gingerbread shape, 2 gusset pieces, the bow tie in the center of the bow tie. Okay, so here are all the parts that were included in the cut files for this pattern. So you have the eyes and the smiley face, buttons. Of course, you could put real buttons on there too if you wanted to. This right here is the swirl for the gingerbread person with the dress on. These are for the arms and these are for the legs. Now make sure that you have whatever size that you're making of your gingerbread person is the same as the size of your decorations. So I'm making the small, so I have all the small size files. Since I'm doing the gingerbread without the dress, I'm going to do the arms and the legs. And I'm trying to decide if I also want to do the buttons in white. I think it would be cute. I do have some black that I can do for the face. But, you know, this is totally creative and you can do whatever colors and fabrics and HTV that you want. A quick tip, if you decide to use a cutting machine, you want to use fabric, is to make sure that you use a big enough piece of fabric that it's not going to get twisted or moved around and it all adheres to the mat. So make it a bigger piece of fabric than you think you need to. If you're cutting out heat transfer vinyl, go ahead and do that in the colors that you prefer. If you decide to use HTV, you can cut out all the different pieces and it does not really matter which way they go. We'll end up cutting each of these out and then ironing them on to the gingerbread person wherever they are supposed to go. Here I've cut the face out. I did need to attach my face, so if on your program the face moves around any of the little pieces, just go ahead and weld or attach it before you get to the cutting part, and it should work great. Okay, we have our gingerbread man front, so all we have to do now is either grab your HTV or the fabric that you cut, and if you wanted to do real buttons, that could be fun too. And you could sew them on like this. Now, if you're making this size, this might be a good size button, but if you're making like the large size, you might want to like size up on your buttons, or maybe you want a big one with the small guy, whatever you feel like. If you're using HTV or fabric, they're already sized for you, and you can go ahead on the HTV and cut them out. If you're using fabric, go ahead and skip this part of the video and go to the part where I show you how to applique the fabric decorations on. This is HTV, so let's start with that. On the HTV, you have like this hard side, and if you've done this before, you already know this part, you can go ahead and skip ahead. But this is the part that it's going to iron on, so we put that down so that I cannot feel that white part on this side. And then this clear side is going to pull up after we iron it. So we can just go ahead and layer them on here. Just like that. I'm going to go ahead and continue cutting those out. Okay, he is looking so cute. Now, one last note is if you are doing the gingerbread with the dress, on the bottom of the dress right here, there's one more frosting piece that goes across the bottom right there. And there's not a bow tie here, but you could put one right here on the head. I'm going to get started with ironing these all on. One last thing I wanted to note is that these icings, make sure that they're centered between the two edges here so that there's the same amount past the white here and past the white here to the edge. Otherwise, it's going to look a little wonky after you get it all on there and then sewn up. So I'm going to grab my pressing cloth, or this in this case, it's Teflon. And I'm just going to place that first on the face here. And I've got my iron set. I'm actually going to pull that down to probably wool. Between wool and cotton is usually good, but do remember, if you have some kind of synthetic fabric that you can't get up this high, you need to be really careful with this part. And while that's cooling, we're going to go ahead and do the rest of them. So here's the arm. Okay, let's take a look and see if that got real nicely stuck down. Oh, he is cute. Very cute. If you're at all worried that something isn't quite stuck down, you can take your pressing cloth and just go over it without the plastic. Don't go too crazy because you do not want to end up like melting your fabric. But just to make sure that everything is nicely pressed and it's smooth. Sometimes when you pull the plastic off, the vinyl gets a little wrinkly. I think that's looking pretty good. Follow along here if you prefer to cut pieces of fabric out and applique them onto your gingerbread pillow instead of using HTV. Well, let's talk about what we need to do before we start appliquing on our decorations. First, we need to have something interfaced at the back in order to have the stability in the fabric from the front. If you're using a thicker fabric, you may not need this. However, if you're using most of the fabrics that are recommended, I would say to add just a little bit of interfacing on the back. So that's the one option. The other option is that you can use a product like this one. This is called Heat and Bond Light. And I just cut off a little piece of it. And you actually put it on the decoration itself. So this is another piece of flannel. And you want to make it a little bit bigger than what you're going to cut out. So it has like this shiny side, and you put it on the wrong side of your decoration fabric. And then you're going to iron for just about 2 seconds. 1, 2. Wait till it cools just a tiny bit. And then there's a little piece of backing right here to pull off. And this is what you can then iron to your fabric. So you can keep it like this, or you can actually just keep the paper on when you're cutting it out. So I'll go cut a little thing of icing. So now I have our piece of icing, and we have that heat and bond on the back. This is not necessary, but it does just make it stick a little easier. A couple of other options if you decide not to do something like the heat and bond is you can use a basting spray, a glue stick, yep, like one that you would have at school, or of course you can do classic and you can pin it down all along. And just, I would go overboard a little bit on the pins and just make sure that really doesn't move before we get it over to the sewing machine. If you decide to use this heat and bond, you would just put it on. I don't have another one right now, so we're just gonna pretend. You would just go ahead and lay it on there while it wasn't stuffed and everything. As you can see, I did make this just a little bit longer to make sure that it would sit inside the seam allowances. So if you decide to do the applique, not a bad thing to, on these icing pieces, just make them a tiny bit longer so that they can tuck into the seams there. Okay, so we would put it on our fabric, grab the iron, and just press it. Ah, there we go. And it's, I've got some peeling here so I can get that stuck down, but do you see how this is just in place? And it also adds some stability so we don't need to worry about the interfacing. And then that is ready to applique. I wouldn't suggest just doing this or just doing a basting spray. Make sure that you sew it too. If you decide that the applique is a little too difficult for you, you can hand stitch this, or you can even add a zigzag stitch through the center, but it really is going to look the best to applique it. So let's head over to the sewing machine and I'll show you how to do that part. So first of all, we're going to start with a zigzag stitch. So I have a zigzag stitch on my machine here, and we're going to lower the width down to 0.5. And then we have our length here, and this is going to be variable depending on the thickness of your fabric. If you have thinner fabric, you can go lower. If your fabric is thicker, you need to go a little higher because the feed dogs are going to have a harder time pushing that thick fabric through. So let's start at 1 and see how that does. I do recommend doing a little test sample before you get started. So on my all-purpose foot here, I have a center point line right in the middle. And the zigzag stitch is going to go equidistant on either side of that center point line. So I'm going to line up the center of my foot right on the edge of the applique piece. And I've got my thread white because that's the color of what the applique piece is that I'm going to put on here. So go ahead and match your thread for the best results there. And then we're going to go along and we're just going to follow the edge of that all the way around. So let's get started. That looks a little bit narrow to me, so let's try going a little bit wider. And again, this is a test, so you want to do this first and see how that looks. And when you get to a turn like this, you're going to probably need to lift your presser foot and just turn it a bit and make sure that it stays right on that center line. Okay, I like how that's looking. So my settings are 2 for the width and 0.5 for the length. So we'll keep going around and I'll show you what that looks like here in a minute. So right here is where I was getting that length and width really nice. You can see on this side that it was too long, and the width was okay, but it was too long. And so you're not seeing like really pretty applique like stitching there. You can see I got off a little bit right here, so make sure you're staying on there. But right here, it looks really nice. And so that's what you want to see, is really nice stitches right along your edge there. If you're planning on sewing the bow tie on in either this spot or for the one with the dress, you can put it up here, or you're planning on sewing buttons on, or you're planning on embroidering any of this, you will need to interface the back. Since I'm only doing the bow, all I'm going to need is just one little piece of interfacing. This is SF 101. You can also use any light woven interfacing, and it is fusible. So to find the spot on the back, I'm going to poke a pin right here through where the center of the bow tie will be and flip it over. And right there where that pin is where I'll put the interfacing. So you can take one more pin and stick it again through this side right close to it. That way you can remove the first pin, and then you know exactly where that needs to be. Interfacing has adhesive on it, and it's kind of bubbly and rough on this side. Down. Sewing the bow or the bow tie is really quite simple. You'll start with this rectangular piece of fabric and fold it wrong sides together, matching all of the raw edges. And we're going to go ahead and pin or clip around the outside. And on this edge here, the shorter end, we are going to actually put 2 clips, or you can mark it however you like. Some people like to put a pin and then another pin to kind of make like an X, because we're not going to sew in this area. So pin around everything except right here where we're going to leave a gap. So we're going to sew, pivot, sew, back stitch here, start sewing again here, back stitch, pivot, and come back around. Now that you've sewn that, we're just going to go ahead and cut up and over. Do not cut the seam allowance here in the gap, but then cut it around this area. I'm going to go ahead and use pinking shears, but you can also use regular shears and cut it down to about a 1/4 inch seam allowance everywhere except that gap. Okay, now at the corners, we're going to go ahead and trim off all that excess fabric right here in the corner area. You can again use pinking shears or regular shears for this. And around these areas right here at the corners, I'm going to trim that into closer to 1/8 of an inch, just so that we don't have any extra bulk. Great. Now just flip it. You can stick your fingers in through here in that gap and flip it to the right side. Once you have it turned out the right side, we still need to get those corners looking better. So you can stick a chopstick or another blunt object in through the gap, and carefully, don't press too hard on your corners or else you'll have a wonky corner. Push out all 4 corners until they look nice. And then we're going to press it, and making sure that that part right there where the gap is, that you push all of that seam allowance in. It doesn't need to be perfect. It will kind of line up where you sewed it, but we need to make sure that that's flat at the top. If you have any corners that look kind of rounded like this, you can grab something sharp, a pin and all, and stick it gently in the corners to help pull it out so that you have a sharper corner. Then just give it a good press. So here's our cute little bow tie all pressed, and the gap for it is right here. But what we're going to do is we're going to start scrunching it right here at the middle, all the way down till you have it pretty evenly and nicely scrunched. Like this. And it will make our bow tie, and then we're going to put that center piece in here after we get it sewn. So we'll just kind of play with that. Make it nice and kind of pleated back and forth all the way down the bow tie. And then once you have it how you want it, I'm gonna grab a piece of doubled up thread. So this is a piece of thread and I just folded it in half so that I have two. And you can tie it around center of the bow tie. And then we're just going to tie it off. I'm going to grab my two ends and tie them. We are going to put that other piece on, but you do want this tied pretty well. So I'm going to go ahead and do a square knot. So I'm going to go this looped end through, and then the not looped end through the hole here. And then we'll take a look. How does it look? I think it looks really cute. If you find that it's like not centered, you can kind of maybe wiggle it around a little bit or redo it if you need to. And we'll put that out of the way for just a moment so that we can work on the center part of the bow tie. So this tiny little piece here, I'm going to fold it right sides together and pin or clip along this edge here. And then we'll sew down this edge and come right back with a 3/8 or 1 centimeter seam allowance. Okay, and you're just going to go ahead and trim that seam allowance, and we'll flip it right side out. If you have a turning tool like this, you can use it, or you can just kind of finger turn it right side out. Now I need to quarter our gingerbread shape. Okay, once you have it turned, you can put the seam right here in the back, kind of just push it over to it's in the back. And then once it's nice and centered on the back, we'll give it a good press. This has been pressed well, so all we have to do is just wrap this around the bow tie here in the center. Get it nice and snug. That looks so cute. And then we're going to go back to the sewing machine, and well, you can hand stitch this as well if you'd like. But I think I'm just going to go ahead and tuck that into the sewing machine with a zipper foot and sew as close as I can right here against the edge of the bow tie. And that way that will be nicely secured. We're not going to cut this off yet because this will help us to sew the bow tie itself to the gingerbread. So I'm going to switch to my zipper foot. Now that you've sewn real close to the bow, you have these little extensions. I'm going to trim mine just a tiny bit with pinking shears. If you don't have pinking shears, you could serge the ends or do a little zigzag stitch just so that they are not going to fray underneath. Just a quick note here, if you are wanting to have the bow on top of the head, you can actually attach it in the seam between the front and the gusset. So pause here on the bow, don't fold it if you want to do it this way, and come back later. Next, you're going to fold them in so that this side of the fold here is 1/4 inch. And then the same on the other side, so that how much is sticking out from the center from here to here is 1/4 inch and 1/4 inch. And you can tuck this underneath if you wanted, if you didn't get it like nicely pinked or zigzagged or serged. I have this pinned in place, and so I'm going to flip it over and set it right here where the bow tie goes. And then we're going to grab a few more pins and make sure that's really well seated on there. You could also use some steam-a-seam, some double-sided hem tape, or even like some basting glue. But basically you just want this in place. So I'm going to put one more pin. And then we'll just go over to the sewing machine, and with our zipper foot, we're going to sew as close as we can to both of these ends. And you will see that just underneath just a tiny bit right there. You know, if that bothered you, you could hand sew this on, but if you want to do it with the machine, it will look like that, but all your ends are tucked in, and I think it will be really cute. on a real person, a bow tie would stick out just a tiny bit as well. So let's go over and get that sewed up. Oh, that turned out adorable. I love it. It does have some play, but I kind of like the play in there. It's like kind of fun that you can like, whoop, like it's a real bow tie, you know? Okay, let's move on to our next step. Take your two gussets, both right side up, and put them right side together. So you can put the top, you can flip this one over the top and make sure that they are right sides together right here, and pin or clip along these short ends. Then we'll take it back to the sewing machine and go ahead and stitch along this short end and this short end. Now we just need to trim up the seam allowance. So you can use pinking shears or regular shears to trim that down to about half the seam allowance, so about 1/4 inch on both sides. I'm going to press them open with the iron. And what that does is it just gives you a nice pressed seam on the right side. So we'll take our sewn gusset and lay the seams on top of each other. This is so that we can quarter the gusset. On one side, after you've centered up those seams, we'll put a clip right here where it folds. And then we'll do the same thing on the other side. We'll center that up. Pull yourself out to where it folds. And you can pin or clip that spot. And now you have quartered it. If you'd like, you can also put a clip here and here, or pin. And then that way you have your 4 quartered points. And we're going to match those up to our gingerbread person. We're going to fold it. Doesn't matter if it's right sides or wrong sides. And we'll place one pin or clip right there at the top of the head. Remember that we're going around the outside, so it'd be right here in between the legs. So we have our 2 pins or clips there, and then for the other quarter points on these, you're going to refer to the pattern markings. There's a little notch, and that is where the side quarter point will be. And then be sure to do that on the front as well. Okay, here's where you put that bow in. So all you need to do is just baste it to the front of the front shape, right there at the head on the side, right before you put this part of the gusset on next. Now we're going to match our gusset up to our gingerbread person. So starting with one of the seams, you're going to lay it right sides together at that seam to where we marked the center top of the head with the right side of our gingerbread person, and pin or clip. And then make sure it's the same way and this doesn't get twisted. And we're going to match our next one, this seam, to the seam right here. And not shown here is those quartered points on your gusset need to match up with the quarter points on your gingerbread shape. And take your time so that everything is evenly matched. Pin or clip that into place. If you get to a quarter point and you realize that you have a little bit of excess fabric, go ahead and push back through the ones that you already did, unclip or unpin them, and redo it so that it sits really nicely. Now we're going to go around and sew the entire gusset to your gingerbread person. But I want to say one really important tip here. On all of these edges around the feet, around the arms and the head where it's curved, you want to grab your scissors and cut into just the gusset, not the gingerbread shape, but just the gusset, less than your seam allowance, so less than 3/8 or 1 centimeter in all of those spots. You can also do this when you get to the sewing machine if you're a little confused about where to cut, and I'll show you what that looks like here in just a second on the sewing machine. So right here, I was having a hard time going around one of the hands or arms or anyway, go ahead and clip into the gusset about every ½ inch, and you'll be able to ease those gusset areas around the curved parts of the shape much easier. Once you have that sewn all the way around, we need to grab our pinking shears or regular shears and trim up that seam allowance to about half of its original width. This is going to help the seams lie really flat. It's very important to do this step. Don't skip it. And then after we go all the way around and get those clipped up, we're going to grab some shears, some sharp shears, and clip into all of the areas between the legs, between the arms and the head, and between the arm and the body, so that we can get those little triangles cut out and have everything lay flat in those areas. So you can trim some little triangles and cut into all of those areas with your shears. And as you can see, that made the seams look a lot nicer. Next, we're going to go ahead and lay the back piece right sides together with the gusset and sew it just the same way as we did the first time with the front piece. On this one, I knew where I needed to trim around the gusset because it's opposite of where I trimmed on the front side. So I went ahead with my scissors and just went ahead and clipped into those areas. And I didn't have to do quite as much clipping at the sewing machine. You can do it how you'd like here. Next, you'll grab the back piece and place it right sides together with the gusset, matching up the quarter points at the top, the bottom between the legs, at the seam of the gusset, the same way as we did on the front, and then also those side points that are marked in the sewing pattern. And then you'll clip and ease all the way around the gusset and that back piece again. The only difference here is we're going to leave a gap so that we can turn it. So go ahead on one of the sides, below the arms, but above the legs, leave about a 3-inch gap. You need to be able to get your hand in there. I actually made my gap just a little bit too small, and I was having to really shove my hand in there to get all the stuffing in later. So make sure your gap is big enough. Once you've sewn up your gusset and trim the seam allowances and cut into all those corners just the same way, you'll have your gap. And make sure you do not trim the seam allowances at the gap. You're only going to trim them not at the gap, because we're going to close that later and we want it to be the full seam allowance. Then you're going to turn it right side out and it's time to stuff it. We're almost done. So exciting. So flip it over and find that gap and grab your stuffing. I used polyfill, but whatever kind of fiber fill or stuffing that you have, you can use. And the size small here needed about 5 or 6 ounces of polyfill. So you do need quite a bit. Here's the trick with the polyfill. You want to use small pieces. Don't use huge wads and put them in there because you'll have a lumpy shape. You want to have like smaller pieces that you kind of pull apart and stuff into all the corners, at the head, at the hands, at the feet, and put more than you think you need. I had to go a couple times and kind of even him out and then go, oh, I need more, I need more. And at the end, you can use what I'm doing here and get all that stuffing off of your gingerbread person, and he is ready to close up. You can choose to machine sew this, but I'm going to close it up by hand. So I have my needle, I've doubled the thread over, and I'm tying a knot at the end that's a whole bunch of times, so it's really thick. And then we're doing a ladder stitch. Now, if you need help with the ladder stitch, I'll add a link in the description below that will show you exactly how to do the ladder stitch step by step in another video we have. But basically what you're going to do is you're going to pin up that gap really well, and then you're going to put your needle in from the wrong side up to the right side so that you can hide the knot. And then you're going to stitch on both sides so that your thread is hidden on the inside. So you do a little stitch on the one side of the gap and then the other side of the gap until you get all the way down to the bottom, and then you tie off your thread and your gingerbread pillow is all closed up and finished. Okay, well, we're all finished. I hope you love your gingerbread pillow as much as me and my kids love mine. All three of them have separately come into the sewing room after I made this and tried to haul off with it. This is mine. They're like hugging it and running away, and I had to go get it back. So I might be making 2 more. But anyway, I love how mine turned out. I hope you love how yours turned out too. Again, you can find the link to this pattern in the description below, and be sure to go check out the rest of the videos on the Ellie Mac channel. We have so many different fun projects. If you like craft projects like this, we also have a beautiful, it's a pillow that's a big flower, and there's a bunch of different sizes for it. There's one that's even big enough to make it a dog bed, which is so cute. And plus we have all the ones for clothing and bags. So go check those out, and we'll see you next time.